Welcome, my name is John, and I'm just here to discuss movies on the YT. And if you'd like to join that discussion, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and hit that notification bell as well. And today we have another tag video. I was tagged by Man of Movies once again, and I'm happy to participate in these tags. And this particular one is about the top 10 wow movie moments, and my list is kind of a mixture of just wow moments and a mixture of just favorite scenes. And so this was a very hard list to narrow down, and I honestly could only narrow it down to 15 or 16, but there are 10 that I want to talk about more than the others. So I'm just going to mention like the other 5 or 6 movies as honorable mentions, even though if I was to legitimately rank them, they might be in the top 10. That I just don't necessarily think they either need to be talked about, or I don't feel like talking about them as much as the other 10 moments. And so, let's get started. Starting with the honorable mentions, we have the Dark Knight opening scene, the portal sequence from Avengers Endgame, we have the dinner scene from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we have the Mufasa's death where Scar kills Mufasa in the original Lion King. Marie's authenticity performance from Malcolm and Marie, which is a movie I absolutely adore. And I even have already recorded a video about why I love it. I just ran into some issues. I planned on having it out last week, but I ran into some issues. And then lastly, we have the subway scene, the tragic subway scene from Fruitvale Station, which is probably Ryan Coogler's best film, even though he has gone on to do a couple like blockbusters. I still think this is probably his best film, and even Michael B. Jordan's best performance. It's very under talked about, but very relevant and devastating. And coming in at number 10 is Peter Parker's death from Spiderman Into the Spiderverse. Now, this is one of those instances where real life kind of tragedies played into the moment, and this kind of starts a theme with some of my picks on this list. They're very much tragic moments that I chose. For whatever reason, those are moments that stick with me the most. And so roughly like a month before this movie came out, like Stan Lee passed away, and his cameo in this movie happens during the funeral sequence. And then on top of that, the song that's playing features XXXTentacion, who was killed the summer before this movie came out. And I'm a fan of XXXTentacion, especially the Question Mark album. And so you just had those 3 things come together in that moment, and I almost teared up when I saw it for the first time for those reasons. And next we have Sylvester Stallone's final monologue from First Blood. This monologue on its own is why I love this movie so much. The rest of the movie is good, but this is why I love not only this movie but the franchise. If this monologue didn't exist and if it wasn't as good as it is, then I honestly wouldn't even care about the character, regardless of the quality of the sequels. It makes me care about the character, and because of that, it makes me like the sequels, most of them anyway. And so it's just kind of the scene that makes this franchise what it is, in my opinion. And it's what makes this movie so freaking good. I love First Blood. And next we have probably my second favorite action movie of all time, which actually came out in the same exact year as my favorite action movie of all time. And that is John Wick Chapter 2. And for all of the awesome action scenes that this franchise has, and even for the heartbreaking scene that kind of kickstarts the stuff in the first movie with the dog, my favorite moment in the entire franchise is neither one of those. It's rather the moment towards the end of this movie, not the very end, but towards the end, when John Wick goes back to the Continental to meet D'Antonio, the Camorra mafia guy. And he's at the Continental, which has all of these rules, and everyone follows the rules. John Wick himself has always followed the rules, and they have these strict rules, and you don't expect him to just break it like that. It feels like he's going to stick with it, and figure something else out. But he just gives up and just bang shoots him out of nowhere. And I think the shock value of it is earned and just wow inducing, and the way it's pulled off and everything. I just love that moment. And next we have Alfred Hitchcock's classic Psycho. Now when it comes to horror movies, with the exception of The Sixth Sense, nothing was ever spoiled for me. Unlike other genres like in Star Wars and the whole I'm Your Father stuff, that was spoiled for me when I was like 2 years old or whatever. But when it came to horror movies, nothing other than Sixth Sense was ever spoiled for me. And I went into this movie because I had previously seen like the Friday the 13th, and, you know, spoiler alert, Jason's not actually the killer in that movie, or the first movie. And so I kind of went in this, and with the way this storyline played out, I was just thinking it was like an inspiration for having the mother be the killer and everything. But then the kind of twist happens. You see the mom's like corpse, and you realize that it was Norman the whole time. It's just a moment that really shocked me the first time I ever saw this movie, and I still love it today. The movie itself, I appreciate a lot more than I actually love, but that twist and that moment, I love to death. And next we have my favorite action movie of all time, Baby Driver, which has one of the most underrated movie villains of all time in John Hamm's Buddy, and it is showcased perfectly in the diner sequence, or the diner scene towards the end, when you have him speaking with Baby and he has a gun underneath the newspaper pointed at the waitresses. I love that scene so much. It's so like tense for me. For whatever reason, I just love that scene and the way it plays out. And it's one of my all-time favorite scenes in any movie. And next we have Final Destination 5. This is actually my favorite in the franchise, and part of that is because of the ending of this movie. It's kind of tied for first place in terms of my favorite horror movie endings, and I just love how the entire time you think it's taking place in modern day, but then they have a twist that it's actually a prequel to the first movie. And then when you go back and rewatch it, they're not using iPhones, like 2011 iPhones or anything, and none of the cars necessarily resemble like they have to be from 2011, and so like it all like fits in there too with the timeline and stuff. It's not like Chainsaw 3D where it's supposed to take place in the 90s, but they're using iPhones. It's not like that type of scenario, and so it's just a twist that kind of blew my mind for some reason when I first saw it. But it was also like one of the first horror movies I saw in the theaters. It's probably my second one. I think Scream 4 came out before this, but I absolutely love this movie, and a lot of that has to do with the ending. And next we have Roberto Rossellini's Rome Open City, and the moment I'm talking about is Pina's death and kind of the actiony sequence that happens after it. And it just shocked me when I first saw this, because Pina was basically portrayed as being the main character, and then halfway through the movie she gets killed off, and you just have this awesome action sequence which for its time feels very real. And kicking off my top 3 is Get Out. The moment I'm referring to is towards the end, basically after he's escaped and killed the family, and all of a sudden you have this black guy with all these white dead bodies around him, and all of a sudden a cop car shows up, and obviously with real life situations and stuff, it just makes you sink. Like, this almost feels like it's gonna turn into one of those just dreadful endings similar to my next pick on this list, just dreadful horror endings. But then all of a sudden it flips the expectations that you expect because of real life social issues, and you see Lil Rel Howery come out of a TSA car that just happens to have the red blue lights on top of it. And my theater actually gave a standing ovation when Lil Rel Howery stepped out of that car, and it's just a moment that's always stuck with me. And next we have The Mist. This is tied with Final Destination 5 in terms of my favorite horror movie endings. I get for some people it doesn't work. It's a little too dark and dreadful of an ending. But for me, that's kind of what makes it work, is because of how dreadful and dark and how kind of how it blows your expectations of that scene, and it just really sticks with you and is such a wow moment. I think this film is very underrated and underappreciated because some people think the ending is too much. And spoiler alert if you haven't seen this movie, but it's basically a father basically kills his family to put them out of their misery because they're being like hunted by these mist creatures. And so he puts his family out of the misery and kills them. And then right after he kills them, he doesn't have any bullets left. But right after he kills them, you have the National Guard come through, and it's just such a gut-wrenching, dreadful realization that if he just waited like 5 more minutes, his entire family would still be alive. And it's just one of those moments that sticks with you. And coming in at number 1 is probably a cliche pick, especially among fans of this franchise, but it would have to be the ending to Furious 7 with Paul Walker's send-off, or Brian O'Connor's send-off. I love the moment so much. And as a kid, I wasn't too much into fantasy. There were some exceptions, a couple exceptions, but I wasn't really into fantasy. And so, like, the early 2000s franchises of, like, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, I never got into them. But growing up, I was really into cars. Nowadays, I don't really know anything about cars, but growing up, for whatever reason, I was really into cars. And so this franchise really brought me in because of that. I got brought into this franchise because of that. And so I kind of grew up alongside this franchise. And I grew up with these characters. I grew up with Paul Walker and Brian O'Connor's probably like my favorite movie character as a kid, and still up there as one of my favorites. And so when you see this movie do such a fantastic job of sending him off like that, it just makes my heart, it's like heartwarming and yet sad and tragic at the same time. So thanks for watching this video. Go ahead and share your favorite wow movie moments in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and smash that thumbs up icon, smash that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell as well to stay up to date on my channel. And I'm just going to tag like 3 people here. I'm going to tag Cinema Critics Reviews, The Upside Dan, and Rick Alba from On Pop Culture. They're all 3 great people. I highly recommend checking them out. And I will return next time when I see you again.